Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about the main things. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, what would you say are the main things to know as an up-and-coming computer programmer? So the main things are probably that it takes a while to get good at software development and in programming. Usually it takes between 1 to 5 years-ish to get to a point where you're applicable to do serious work. And the first job is on average the hardest one to it's the hardest one to get usually. As a junior software developer, you struggle you can find it a little bit difficult to break into the industry. Once you're in, on the other hand, if you have a few years of experience, things change quite drastically for you, and usually it's much smoother ride after that. And then it's also good to know that it takes long. It can take even, in many cases, it takes longer than that to get to a sense of comfort within your skills, because software development and programming is a gigantic field. There's a lot of tools, a lot of theory, and like different concepts, etc., etc. So even at your first job, guys, or even after your second job, even after working for a few years, it's very likely that you're going to experience something that people call imposter syndrome, basically. Which is this idea that you feel like you don't really know what you're doing. Everybody else seems to know what they're doing and you don't. And it's a very common sensation, and it's practically part of the job description to feel that when you start out, because this is extremely technical. It's a lot of fun, but it requires a lot of time to get good at this. It is what's called an expert field, if you will. And as you can imagine, it's not something that you're going to master in a month or two. It's going to take years of practice to get really good at this thing until you feel fairly comfortable in what you're doing. That can take many, many years to get to that level. And some people never get there, because it really comes down to how well do you feel that you understand your ecosystem, your tools, and like how do you compare to other software developers, and your perception of how well you are doing in comparison to them, and so forth. And so there is a bit of an emotional journey for you, apart from, of course, like the knowledge that you're going to have to acquire in order to make it into the industry and sort of like make yourself into a full-fledged professional software developer. So it's good for you to sort of understand that it is a bit of a hill climb, like you need to get over the hump, if that makes sense. And that hump is, as I said, is usually found in those first 5 years of your career. They will be if you've enjoyed tech and so forth, you're going to have a lot of fun, but you should know that you're going to feel a certain amount of stress, and you're going to feel some anxiety, and it's going to feel like you don't really know what you're doing many times, a lot of times. And the key, I will argue, is what I believe, to making it into becoming a really senior profile, is to sort of accept that, to sort of accept the anxiety and the fear and so forth, and simply continue coding, like just sort of work through it. Just continue working, continue learning, because that's the remedy to feeling all that anxiety and discomfort and nerves and all that good stuff. The more skills you acquire, the more comfortable you feel with your tools, the quicker all of this sort of goes away, because you know that you can meet the expectations. I like to say that I try to make the analogy to, if your learning starts out as a line, then sooner or later you're going to be asked to build the same thing twice, and then you loop on a concept and you get to repeat it. And then you might have a lot of other stuff that you need to learn, and so it continues forward, the line just continues, and then you start looping again when you have to repeat something. And then after a few years, everything is just a repetition. You almost never learn something new. You're basically only recreating things that you've already learned how to make. And then you start really feeling the sensation of that, yeah, I've done this 100 times, it's not a problem for me anymore to do this sort of thing, right? That, as I said, on the other hand, it takes a while to get there. So when you're starting out, you should sort of prepare yourself for that. The work is going to include a bit of this stress. And then finally, I would suggest that it's good for you to learn how to find the balance between being self-reliant and asking for help. So I like to say that one of the most valuable skills that you can have is good Googling skills, because a lot of the time you might not be able to just ask for help and then have someone tell you how to fix a problem. In many cases, you have to find the solution by yourself, and so Google is like search engines and so forth, like the internet is your friend here. And there's a lot of people in the community who put up Stack Overflow answers, or like you might find some GitHub threads on like an issue somewhere on GitHub on a package you're using or something like that you can read about, or someone's blogged about it, etc., etc. So finding the answer to your own questions is a very, very worthwhile investment, and you should very much master that, because in some cases you work on projects yourself, and in some cases you might have a coworker or someone who is more experienced with you, who can answer some parts of the system or like give you some hints and tips and so forth. But on average, most software developers have to work in a fairly self-reliant fashion, because you can't always depend on the fact that you have someone else around that's going to help you fix your problem. So you need to learn how to, as I said, find the answer, or like a thread of what the answer could be, something like a clue, to find a clue as to how to solve your own problem. And then it's a lot of staring at the screen, feeling dumb and trying things out until you start to figure out, aha, okay, this is probably what I did wrong. Let's try this, let's try that. You try things out, you experiment a little bit until you can make progress. So what I want you to take away from this is that the main things to know, I would say, about being a computer programmer is that it takes, it's a technical field, it's an expert field. It takes about 1 to 5 years to get fairly good at it, to a level where you're considered to be at least a junior level software developer, depending on who you are and like your skills and like how much you invest and so forth and so forth. It's also a bit of, apart from a learning journey, it's a bit of an emotional journey. A lot of people feel something we call imposter syndrome, where you feel nervous and anxious because in a sense it's like learning a second language. You're going to suck at it because you don't know the words, and then you have to speak to some native speaker who's like really, really good, and it feels like you don't really know how to talk to them. And this is very, very normal. You should know that the best remedy for this is just to continue trying, because you're going to fuck up. It's sort of like accepting that you're going to fall over in like a mud pit over and over, because you're doing like you know one of those courses where you need to get to the other end and there's a bunch of obstacles in an obstacle course. You're going to get dirty. It's just a fact that you're going to have to get in the mud and start crawling and stuff like that. So you just emotionally learn that this is part of the journey, and then accept that that is a part of the journey, because the remedy of it is to just continue. Because the more coding you do, the more learning you do, the less you're going to feel that sensation of, oh, I don't really know what I'm doing. Because the more skills you have, well, at some point, as I said, you're just going to sit there and loop, and you're basically going to be bored in some cases, because you're doing the same thing you've done 100 times before. And then lastly, make sure that you understand that self-reliance is a fairly important factor in being a software developer. Sometimes you're lucky and you have like coworkers or people who can give you answers to your questions. You should absolutely learn how to ask for help, because you can't do everything by yourself, but you at the same time have to understand that in many cases the only way for you to solve your problem is to find a solution on the internet, like find a thread, find a Stack Overflow answer, something like that. Experiment a bit, try things out, see how things fit together, and sort of play around with your problem, and feel a lot of frustrations in many cases. And sometimes it can take hours, and sometimes it can take days for you to solve a bug or an issue or something like that. And you just have to keep at it. It's a bit of a grind, if that makes sense. And the way you solve that is, as I said, by learning how to find the answer to your own questions. That is a very important part of being a software developer. In many cases on the job, you are working on a story or like a task by yourself. You can, in some cases, ask for help, but in some cases, you only have yourself. Have a great day.